this thing up here. So we're just going to give a round of applause for this guy. So many questions. So just want to pass the mic and let him introduce all of our presenters for today.
Thanks, Timmy. So, do I need this? I don't think I need this. I don't think I need this. So, first of all, I just want to say thank you again for taking time out of your day to come and to be here and to take the opportunity that has been given to you to really hear from some extraordinary people. We have this panel before you of elders, of activists, of amazing human beings who each in their own way have lived extraordinary lives, experienced extraordinary things, contributed some really important, in small ways and large ways, important pieces to the world just by being who they are. So just going down the list, I want to first introduce Ibrahim Hamida. Did I pronounce that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So Ib is an icon around this area. He owns Cafe Soraya. Ib was born in Palestine, in Bethlehem, and left when he was 18, and has experienced a lot of the conflict there between Israel and Palestine, and will have a lot to tell us about his life and about what he's experienced since leaving. Lily Parker is the third African American family to come to Eugene. And having gone to the first graduating class of Sheldon High School. Is there anybody here from Sheldon? All right, well, there you go. Lily was there when it first started. And having grown up in Eugene, has a lot to share about what it means to be here as a person of color in this place. So Zelda Haro is Yaqui Chicana and has joined us she grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and she was, you said, a high school dropout and currently working on a doctorate. And among her many activities, she worked with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers Union in Southern California and Arizona during that time to bring rights to farm workers there. Eddie Little Crow comes to us originally from the Crow Creek Reservation. He's a longtime member of the American Indian Movement. And among the many things that he has participated in was involved in the siege of Wounded Knee. Is it fair to call it a siege? Occupation, maybe a better word, of Wounded Knee in 1973, where, and he's going to tell you about that and why. But among other things, has been an activist for Native rights, for human rights, for the environment. And so we're very lucky to have him as well. Art Pearl is 93. Is that right, Art? Art has been involved in, has testified to Congress, has advised senators, has been an educator, has taught teachers, has taught the teachers who teach the teachers. And among Art's many passions is the really encouraging us all to engage in democracy and what that means to be an engaged citizen. So with that, can you all just welcome them, give them a... And so I think if we can start with Art and move down the line, if you all would like to, if you can just take some time, 15, 20 minutes, and share a bit about where you've come from, what you have been involved with, and whatever wisdom you'd like to share with our young attendees. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
All you gotta do is turn them on.
I grew up in San Francisco. My father died when I was 11 in 1933. Not the best year to figure out dying. My mother, who had never been to school, and was a undocumented immigrant. She was put on a caravan when she was 15 with people she didn't know, walked all the way across Europe from the Ukraine, got to Ellis Island, got smallpox. They couldn't send her back, so she escaped and spent the rest of her life as an undocumented immigrant, which really was no problem until McCarthyism, 1946, the McCarran Act, and from then on every year she was threatened for deportation. She had 2 children. One she called a progressive, that was my sister. The other she called a fascist, that was me. And what made me a fascist was when I did a little boxing, and she called me a barbarian for doing that. I wasn't an activist. I graduated from high school, maybe a little better than Zelda. I graduated with all D's and 1 C. The only reason I had those grades is because I was a pretty good basketball player. And the coach would go around and talk to all the teachers and have. In those days you could play with these, but I never played because I got in trouble. My mother's sole objective was to keep me out of prison, which she didn't exactly do because I worked in prisons afterwards and actually ran a juvenile delinquency agency. The Army made me, I got inducted into the Army in 1943, and the Army made me a progressive. It radicalized me. I learned all about racism when in basic training in Alabama, but even more in the Philippines. After I was there in the Philippines, after we allegedly freed them from the Japanese, but many of them told me they were better off under the Japanese than they were under the Americans. Because seemingly everywhere we go, we seem not to make friends. And now, what I'm most concerned with now, and why I'm very happy to be here, is what really alarms me. If we were doing this meeting in 1965, we couldn't have enough space for the people that would be here. And they would all be here concerned about the crazy war that we got ourselves into. A war in which we were never attacked, in which we ended up hopefully learning a lesson, but we didn't learn that lesson. And here we're now in the longest war in our history, with no end in sight, fighting people who never attacked us in more and more countries, including the one that my mother had to escape from, the Ukraine. The Ukraine, we put $5 billion to overthrow a legitimate government in the Ukraine, to put another government in that was actually very much dominated by the very same people who murdered my mother's father, mother, brothers, cousins, the neo-Nazis who are now in prominent form, and we're supporting them. We created ISIS. There was no ISIS before we got there. We created them. And the real thing that I want to talk to you, and I hope we can talk, why aren't we as much up in arms today as we were then? Democracy, what little we've ever had of it, is more threatened now than it's ever been. Where the wars are being used as an excuse to eradicate every bit of the limited democracy that we once had. We're throwing people in prison for 35 years for doing nothing more than telling us what it is we're doing in Iraq, what it is we're doing throughout the Middle East. Only 2 people who want to be president one of, and you're going to have to choose one of those 18 or 19 to be president. Only two have even mentioned the war. Of the 17, 18 semi-unions, human beings who are running for the presidency as Republicans, all want to increase our military. All but one ran full. And only Bernie Sanders, as a Democrat, has even raised that issue and pointed out he voted against the war in Iraq. This election is more than anything about whether or not we're going to continue on a path that actually will lead us to probably to the elimination of everybody in this earth. So how do you organize the beginning of a movement? And there are more people in this room right now that were at the beginning of every important movement this country had to make this a better country and to make this a better world. So you're in a wonderful position to make a difference. I present this problem to all middle schoolers. If 10 of you decided you wanted to end the war, and the next minute you convinced 10 others that we would get out of these wars, and the next minute all of those would convince 10 others, and they would do this, how many minutes would it take for everybody in the world to be convinced? Guessing is okay. What? Oh, nobody wants to guess?
10.
How many?
10 minutes.
Huh?
10.
10 minutes. He says 10 minutes. How many agree with him?
I agree with him.
How many disagree with him? We're never gonna, I think we just defined the problem with where we are. We're not going to change the world by not making decisions and not taking risks. So you better decide. How many are with them? And how many are against them? Where are the rest of you? 10 minutes is right. And 10 to the 10th power is 10. The fact is, with 10 minutes would convince 1.5 people that exist in this earth. Because 10 minutes is 10 billion. 10 to the 10th power is 10 billion. That's how you organize a movement. Exponential factor. 10 people going out there and beginning to talk to 10 others. To talk to them exactly not only what we're doing, but what we should be doing. What is necessary to get done. Now, can you do that? There are a number of things I've done in my life. And one of them is shortly after I came out of the Army, and when I was still a graduate student at the University of California, the last serious effort we had in this country to create a third party came into existence. And I was able to introduce the former Vice President of the United States, Henry Wallace, who was running on what was the Progressive Party in 1948, to the largest rally they ever had at Berkeley. So you can become involved with that. When I ran for the school board in Santa Cruz, I was told I was far too radical to get elected. I ended up getting 33,000 votes, which is 6,000 more votes than anybody's ever gotten for the school board. And the only people that supported me were high school students. All I had to tell high school students that the only place you could be condemned to without first committing a crime was high school. And that got me 33,000. I called everybody and every voter to make sure they voted for me. So you have a lot of potential power to make a difference if you're willing to do it. During the 60s, and there I was very much involved with Wayne Morse. And Wayne Morse is somebody's name you should know, because Wayne Morse was one of the 2 senators that voted against the Vietnam War. How many, and it's not too far to figure how many, but the percent was because there's 100 senators, 2 for every state. There are 535 congresspersons. How many voted against the war in Afghanistan, which President Obama said was a good war? Everybody here has to know there's no such thing as a good war. There may be unavoidable wars, but Afghanistan certainly was not an unavoidable war. They weren't coming here. So how many of the 535 people in Congress voted against that war?
15.
1. Who was that one? Barbara Lee.
Barbara Lee.
Congresswoman from Berkeley. 1. So what that tells us, as bad as we was in 1964, when we got 2 votes, we're down now to 1 out of 535. Well, you got a congressman. He was once a student of mine back in the years when I taught at the university. Peter, you should be talking to him. You should be talking to the 2 senators. But more importantly, you should be talking to the voters. Because the problem we got in America is the voters. If somebody like Donald Trump can conceivably get 25% of anything other than the home for the mentally deranged, gives you one indication of how big a trouble we're in and how important your voice and your strength is. I can continue to talk about myself, but I'd rather answer questions.
We're going to do questions all together at the end, so keep talking about yourself. You have like 8 minutes.
I'm sorry.
We're going to do questions as a group at the end, so keep talking about
Or I
yourself.
can talk for 8 minutes. All right, 5 minutes, okay. I want to go back and talk a little bit about those sections. I want to talk a little bit about what I taught at the University of Oregon from 1965 to 72. I was a reasonably popular faculty member. In fact, the largest class they ever had was the one I taught. 2,500 students at back court. 2,500 students out of a student body that numbered 10,000. So 1/4 of everybody that was in the university took that course. What was that course? The course was about the 4 threats to human survival. And it was entitled, Can Man Survive?, which would get me in trouble today. So it was about war. It was about destruction of the environment. It was about the economy and their inability to try to deal with poverty. When at that time we were reducing poverty. Now we're increasing it. And the problem of hate is racism. 2,500 students took that course. I imagine if I was teaching it now, I probably wouldn't be able to because we couldn't get the 8 necessary for teaching the course. That's the difference between now and then. And that's the challenge that we all have to face. I've continued to struggle. I'm now kind of, not all, there's not much of me left. But, and anybody, given to where we are, we've never been in anywhere as desperate straits as we are now. And there's never been a need more for people to take the initiative to change things. So I think I'm done.
No, you got 5 more minutes.
All right. I've got in trouble. One of the first people I got in trouble with is a person that somebody would like to think was a great president, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan didn't like me. When Ronald Reagan was governor of California, I had 2 friends of mine who had been graduate students with me that was on his cabinet. One of the things that I had done back in those days was to create a law that found a whole different way to get, one could get a credential. Rather than going to the university and going through all these years of irrelevancy before you can get a job, we created laws that said you got the job first and then you got your education. So you would start out, let's say, as a teacher aide and working as a school, in the school, getting credits for what you learned on the job at the university. You'd work up a career ladder to become a teacher. Well, they were these 2 former friends, these friends of mine, and on his cabinet thought this was a good idea. They wanted Reagan to endorse it, so they got Reagan to introduce me. And I told Reagan how pleased I was to be introduced by California's #1 welfare recipient, a person who took public money and did no work for it. And he got mad. And he stormed out. My 2 friends put their heads down on the table. And I left here in 1965 to go to the University of California in Santa Cruz. At that time, because Eldridge Cleaver had taught a course at Berkeley, faculty could no longer hire new faculty without getting approval from the Board of Regents. University of California, Santa Cruz was just starting, so they didn't know who they could hire, so they sent a delegation of faculty to go to talk to Governor Reagan. And they said that, and Reagan wasn't very helpful, so finally one of them said, well, tell us the name of somebody we can't hire. And the only name he could come up with was mine. Now, how do I know this? I ended up getting more votes on the Board of Regents than he had, so I got hired. And I was there on my first day, taking my books out and fixing my office. And the guy came in and he told me his name is Frank Andrews. He's a chemistry professor, and he wanted to meet me. And I figured, why would a chemistry professor want to meet me? I don't know anything about chemistry. So he said he was one of the faculty members that went to Reagan to find out who they could hire, and he wanted to meet the person they couldn't hire. And that's how I learned about that story. Am I 5 minutes up?
There you are.
So it's on to you.
Well, I'm the most radical on this group, I think, but I never went to the school, never learned to read or write. Didn't want to, you know. I took care of my grandparents. I was raised by my grandparents. I didn't start speaking English till I was 29, 30, somewhere around. And although my friend comments here, you know, I concur. You know, Eldridge Cleaver was a friend. You might say I'm the only card-carrying member of the Black Panther Party that wasn't black. When Huey Newton walked into that court with that gun, I was saying, yeah. You know, because nobody can tell you how to live your life. Nobody should be ordered, nobody should be able to dictate to you how you live your life. No one should be, no, they can't tell you how to live your life and what you should be. No one could do that. I, like I said, was raised on the reservation and brought up all over because my dad was an iron and steel worker. I lived in all the large metropolitan areas across this land that didn't include going over the water or up in the air. So I missed the East Coast. But it's really difficult for me to look at this world through the eyes of you young people. Because this is your world, belongs to you. I'll do all I can within my power to make it a good world, a safe world, a true world, and a workable one. When that cowboy actor come in to that presidency, everything went, including your Congress of the United States and the Bill of Rights. And they changed from civilian to military. Everything is military now. All your rights have been removed. And as a person that never went to school, I look at English-speaking people who have 40 years of education, and unlike this gentleman here, are not too bright. I went before the Congress of your United States, and your vice president was the head of the Senate Investigating Committee. I couldn't believe when he said, he asked me what if I knew why I was called before that committee, before that board. I said, I have no idea, I haven't got a clue. He said, well, you know this person and this person and this person and this person. I said, yeah, they're my relatives, you know. They're my uncles and grandfathers, grandmas. They sort of raised me. He said, well, you know why you're brought before this committee, Mr. Crow? And I said, I ain't got a clue, sir. He said, you mean you're going to sit? I said, I just told you. I don't have any knowledge of why I'm here. When he said organized crime, I about fell out of my chair. Because all I have ever did was pray and do ceremonials and help people. And if that's a crime, I'm guilty. I didn't go into service like this gentleman. Korea was going on, and I wasn't. Them yellow people never did anything to me. So I spent all my young life in a federal reformatory called El Reno. It was Oklahoma. And when I got out, it was the same old war in America. Indians were not only third-class citizens, but we were issues in numbers. We couldn't own property. We couldn't ride taxi and plane, train, boat. Right here in this quaint little village town. Couldn't be in town. We had Indian Day. And my friend said, they kill Indians, don't they? You know, right over here.